The Americans now beginning to use these type of vessels are a pretty big game changer. It's one thing to talk, it's another thing to take decisive action. And of course, President Trump's in a difficult situation now. Iran is prepared to lash out in any direction they see fit without any concern of the consequences. It is extremely dangerous for the whole region and indeed for the world. Of course, it's highly dangerous to strike either oil tankers or LNG tankers. The gas tankers, of course, have every possibility of creating a very significant explosion. And depending on the severity of a strike on an oil tanker, you could also have a catastrophic environmental disaster caused by leakage of oil, which could have very far-ranging effects. So it's highly irresponsible of the Iranians to be doing this. They don't have the ability to really control the amount of damage they do. But actually, they don't really care. Many countries around the world will be very cautious about doing anything that could cause particularly huge environmental catastrophes. But the Iranians don't care about that. They care about flexing their muscles, showing their strength, and acting in a way that they think will demonstrate to the world that they have defeated two nuclear powers, the United States and Israel. Iran has the capability of targeting pretty much any vessel in what's a relatively restricted waterway, and they can do that by utilizing the location data that most ships transmit. And indeed, if they cease to transmit that data, then they could still identify them through various other surveillance capabilities, including drones. And I think that, the Iranians, we shouldn't underestimate the Iranians' capability at either spoofing or overcoming a lack of location data that's provided. They still have some capability, but there's obviously a counter to that, and the Americans are undoubtedly working right now on countering their offensive activity in the Strait of Hormuz. I think it's one thing to talk, it's another thing to take decisive action. And of course, President Trump's in a difficult situation now, because he's got big concerns about the global economy as a result of restraints on the Strait of Hormuz. He has concerns about the continuation of this conflict and the escalation of this conflict, how it will affect the economy, how it will affect the midterm elections. And so, I think he's in a difficult position between making threats, which we've heard a great deal of, and actually carrying out really decisive action. And we don't have much detail about what counteraction the Americans are taking. We know they are taking counteraction. We don't know quite what that is. It's probably quite right that we don't. There's no need for the United States to give away details of what they're either planning to do or what they're actually doing. But what is very important is that decisive action is taken, and that might have to be prolonged decisive action to really shut down this threat to the Strait of Hormuz. It became very obvious during the war that's now somewhat on hold. Well, they're not completely on hold, but it became very obvious that Iran is prepared to lash out in any direction they see fit. I think the one exception to that is likely to be lashing out against China and Russia and their vessels and their other entities, because they are really their only allies, pretty much, that they've got now. And so they will be cautious about that. But anyone else is fair game as far as the Iranians are concerned. And we saw that by the strikes that they launched in response to US and Israeli strikes against Iran, the strikes they launched to their neighbours around the Gulf, including countries that had been very friendly towards Iran up until that point. So that they have no restrictions, no inhibition on their actions that they think work for them. And that's a reason why it was so important that their nuclear capabilities were severely damaged and possibly largely destroyed. And also their ballistic missile capabilities have been written down, because they have, if you can imagine a country that's willing to attack pretty much anyone without any concern of the consequences, to have that country armed with nuclear weapons at some point and continue to be armed with large numbers of ballistic missiles is extremely dangerous for the whole region and indeed for the world. So that, I think, their actions since this war began underlines the need for the war to have taken place and for it to be concluded. The use of drone boats and the potency of those boats has been proven over the last few years by the extreme damage that the Ukrainians caused to the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And effectively, they shut the Russian Black Sea Fleet down, which is a major achievement for a country that has, Ukraine, that has no navy any longer, and has been forced to rely on unmanned vessels, and they've shown to be very, very potent. And I think the Americans now beginning to use these type of vessels are a pretty big game changer. The reality, though, is slightly different in relation to Iran, because Iran's major naval vessels have pretty much all been sunk and therefore are not a threat. But these drone boats can be used against some of the smaller Iranian vessels that are being used as well. And I think they can be extremely effective. And as I say, we've seen that shown. And this is a further indication of a shift, not a total change, but a pretty big shift in naval warfare in the future. Well, I think there's two reasons why Iran is continuing to attack other Gulf states. And the first of those is to flex their muscles, to demonstrate that they haven't been effectively had their military capability completely destroyed. And of course, in the Iranian mindset, the IRGC and the Iranian government, weakness is the worst thing you can show, and they believe that they're showing strength by doing this. The other reason why they've been lashing out among their neighbors is to scare them, to frighten them, and it works. They have scared their Gulf neighbors, and the effects of that can be, and I think the Iranians were calculating that they will be, to get their neighbors to appease them and to draw nearer to them and to have an accommodation with them, rather than continuing to side with the United States. And I think one of the problems of if the United States doesn't carry out decisive action is that the Gulf states will believe that the Americans don't really have their back, and that will drive them more in towards the Iranian camp, not because they have any sympathy or want to be part of the Iranian circle, shall we say. That they would rather do that. They'd rather appease Iran than have Iran continue to attack them. And that's a kind of long-term strategic implication of this conflict if it's not effectively concluded by the United States and Israel. The decision to ban the IRGC and prescribe it as a terrorist organization is long overdue. It should have happened many years ago, because the IRGC, the Islamic Republican Guard Corps, has been the primary tool for Iran's export of terrorism around the world, in the region and globally, and including against the United Kingdom. And back during the time when the Iraq and Afghanistan campaign Britain was engaged in those, the IRGC and its proxies were responsible for killing large numbers of British as well as American and other NATO, other allied soldiers. And at that point, they should have been prescribed. So we're going back many years now, and they've also had many attempts at carrying out terrorist attacks in the UK. It was only a few years ago that an IRGC-sponsored bomb factory in London was interdicted by our security services. So those are just a couple of examples of the IRGC's and Iran's intent to use terror against us. And so they should have been shut down. and now they have been prescribed, and that needs to be rigidly enforced. And anyone supporting in any way the IRGC should be prosecuted. Should not just be a paper exercise. It should be a very real action which causes significant damage to the IRGC. Of course, it will provoke Iran. It will provoke Iran's proxies as well to attempt even further attacks in the UK. But it will, if it's implemented properly, it will close down their capability. They haven't been very successful in what they've done in the UK itself, and that's due, I think, to the extreme capabilities of our intelligence services and our intelligence allies, including Israel, which has provided us with a lot of intelligence relating to Iranian and IRGC activities in this country and against our interests overseas.